know who has access to what? If you are looking for identity and access management talk, you have come to the right place. This is the Identity at the Center podcast. Hosts Jeff Stedman and Jim McDonald are strategic advisors with Identropy's advisory services practice and are here to talk about a wide range of identity and access management topics. Comments, questions, and accolades can all be sent to identityatthecenter.com. And now, on to the show.
All right. Well, welcome to episode number 5. 5 in a row, Jim. We've got a streak going. Is that good?
How about us? I think so. I mean, we're publishing weekly. People can count on our uploads and have some content to listen to on their drive home.
Right. I know people probably set their alarms and, probably they might even ask for the day off, which, we typically publish this on Fridays. So we're recording on a Thursday. So I try to get it out by Friday. But what better way to go into the weekend than, with a little IAM talk?
Absolutely. I mean, it makes people's weekends, Jeff. I'm sure of it.
I know. I'm sure it does. So we've got some timely conversation for this week. I think we want to talk about the Capital One breach, right?
Absolutely. I think that's the headliner in our industry.
Yeah. So what do we know so far on where and what about Capital One?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a few interesting angles. So maybe a couple statistics to start. So I captured these. I went to various websites because I feel like when you get a story like this, you have to go and get information from different sources and cross-correlated and all that stuff. But I've got that 106 million individuals had their data compromised by the Capital One credit card breach. A smaller number, 140,000 customers had their Social Security number swiped. And I thought I saw in one, I think it was the original release by Capital One that 1 million Canadian social insurance numbers were breached as well. So what I thought would be interesting, first off, there's a big gap between that 106 million and the number of Social Security numbers and social insurance numbers that were swiped. And it sounds like a large part of the data pond that was, I don't know if using the term data pond is accurate. It probably isn't. There's a file or a set of files that were captured by this hacker. And a lot of the data was encrypted, and a lot of it was like bank account numbers and things other than Social Security numbers. But a lot of it was credit card applications as well. So a couple things that when I read that, I think like, number one, am I affected? And I'm sure everybody out there who, whether you're a Capital One customer or not, is probably wondering if they were affected, right? Because it's credit card applications. I don't think you necessarily have to be a current Capital One customer to have been affected. And I also think that if you are a Capital One customer, you're probably really worried about it. I know personally, I have a Capital One credit card. And so I obviously was worried about it. A couple other things I thought were interesting were, the time that the breach occurred and that we're just finding out about it now. And that's 3 months. So probably can be explained away. I wasn't able to find a lot of information explaining that time frame from the time of the hack to the time that we're finding out about it. But we did find out about it also after the alleged hacker was arrested. And so that's probably part of it. Like, let's not announce that this is the big deal because we don't want the hacker to, try to flee the country or something. I thought it was interesting information around who it was who was the hacker, and just the tidbits of information that we were able to get about that person, how they performed the hack, how they, put the information out there, which led to figuring out who it was, and maybe just, kind of what their motivations were and things like that. And then the whole tie-in back to Amazon Web Services, because there was, the initial release said something about a firewall being breached. There have been some releases and some information put out by Amazon themselves that said, well, we'll get into all that. So I kind of laid out a bunch of things that were interesting about it to me. What about you?
Yeah, so I think there were some bank account numbers that were part of that too, right? I think somewhere between 77 and 80,000. And if you look at the total number of records, 100 million US, 6 million in Canada, and people are going to look at it and say, 100 million people were affected. Well, I think most of the SSNs and the Canadian equivalent and the bank account numbers are probably the ones that have the most impact. It's a percentage of that 106 million combined. And people are going to look at it two ways. It was like, oh, well, okay, at least, the vast majority of people were secure, but you still think about it, 140,000 SSNs are out there, another 80,000 bank account numbers, et cetera. So it certainly is quite the breach. And it's interesting how it started, as I guess just a random email to Capital One email address, some sort of, kind of tip line, basically, that their data was on GitHub. And it sounds like Capital One, moved relatively quickly to try to, get to the bottom of things. And, the delay, a few months here, I think it was back in March. So 3-4 months of delay in getting the notification out there. I'm sure they had to tie back to, investigations and so forth. I went through a web application firewall, which was misconfigured. And apparently this individual had some sort of Amazon Web Services background. And,
right. She was a former employee of Amazon.
Yeah. So I don't know how that person got, and compromised the account that was associated with that, because it really wasn't an AWS issue. It sounded like more was an application issue that just happened to be hosted in AWS. So, the individual basically compromised the account that was associated with the web application firewall, and then started to run commands and, enumerating and dumping data and that sort of things. Good on Capital One is that they actually had good logging, and they were able to actually determine what commands were run and trace the anatomy of the attack and figure things out. And it was pretty interesting is, this individual didn't really seem to be trying to cover their tracks. They were able to tie the login IP address that the person used on GitHub, where the file was stored under their name, to the IP address where the S3 access was coming from, and they were both using the same VPN, which, people kind of associate VPN maybe with security, but that's not 100% true. Especially important. One thing to consider in this part too is that a lot of VPNs will claim that they don't work, with the government, and they don't keep logs, et cetera. But it's clear, the VPN that was being used here was clearly not doing that, whether they advertised it or not. Something to think about too. Yeah.
Well, so many angles to this, and I think one thing we should point out. Obviously, this news is out there, but this is the alleged perpetrator, right? We don't.
Yeah, that's true.
This is United States, and people are afforded their due process. So we forget to say alleged in any context going forward. That's what we mean. But at least from the news tidbits that have been put out there, one of the things that I remember reading is that Capital One does not believe that the data was sold, and that the perpetrator did not use the bank accounts, or did not access any of the bank accounts. So you almost wonder to yourself, okay, in 3 months since this data was breached, the data wasn't sold, the accounts weren't accessed. So was there a financial motive, or was there something else?
Yeah.
And, heck, we don't know everything about this person yet. But, there were a few things that I saw. One was a screenshot of some kind of messaging application where Erratic, which was the hacker's handle, says something like, I got a bomb strapped to my chest, and I've got these Capital One docs, and it kind of just sounded, it was very like hackery, right? Just the uppercase, lowercase, and the word docs was spelled on DOX, and I thought that was kind of like class or hacker movie kind of stuff. But I kind of wondered, was all this done for kind of ego hacking? So was there really not a financial motive, which doesn't really make it any less of a crime, right? Because as far as Capital One's not concerned, it's going to cost them a fortune to, maybe not a fortune, it's not going to put them out of business or anything, but it's going to cost them a lot of money to deal with this. Plus, they've had to probably run around. Some people are probably working 24/7 in terms of, dealing with media requests and trying to put a lid on this a little bit. So, just a couple of interesting things when it came to that. My guess, Jeff, and, again, we don't have the full anatomy of the hack and like, how did this person get into this web application firewall? But my guess is if we're talking about a misconfigured firewall, in other words, the IP address was open or somehow they were able to get beyond the exterior firewalls. And then they either used a password that was easily guessed, a password that was dumped or purchased on the dark web, or maybe a default password. It could be any of those things. I don't know if we'll ever get that information, but my guess is that they didn't like brute force, or the perpetrator didn't brute force this application firewall. They had a password that they were able to use to, walk right through.
Yeah. I mean, the person obviously had experience at AWS and knew this stuff. And apparently, was, rather knowledgeable in this area, but it doesn't sound like this was necessarily a difficult thing in the grand scheme of things to pull off. The motive really is interesting because if it isn't financial, then it gets back to ego hacking or, something on those lines. But this is the kind of breach where the number of records, the type of data, and the motive and the lack of really trying to cover tracks, they don't line up right. That's I think the weirdest thing about this entire kind of story is it's almost like the individual wanted to get caught, and it doesn't make sense from that perspective. It doesn't fit the profile of a normal breach behavior might look like. And if they were talented enough to get in, do all this work, and then they just use the same VPN, and they're able to track IP addresses very easily that way. Something doesn't smell right in that regard. And I'm not typically a conspiracy theorist at all, but something's not lining up there. And I wonder if there's more that we just don't know about yet or ever will.
There's definitely more that we don't know about. Whether we ever will or not, I'm not sure. Maybe that information will come out in a couple of years. Hey, you're going to be at the Black Hat conference next week. We're hoping to do a podcast from there. I'm sure this will be talked about.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be. And I'm sure vendors are already starting to position their marketing around, how they would help in that scenario. So, if there's something with helping protect AWS credentials, or manage them more effectively, because I think Amazon made a statement, right, that it really wasn't tied to AWS, and the AWS worked as expected. So they kind of punted it back over to Capital One, right?
Right. So I can read the quote that I found. It said Amazon Web Services, the company's cloud product, in other words, Capital One's cloud, was not compromised in any way and functioned as designed, a company spokesperson told the Associated Press. The perpetrator gained access through a misconfiguration of the web application and not the underlying cloud-based infrastructure. As Capital One explained clearly in its disclosure, this type of vulnerability is not specific to the cloud. So, let me bring it back one if I could, because I thought what was interesting was the arrested individual. Her name was Paige Thompson. A little bit about her background. So let me go over a few of my notes. So 33-year-old former Amazon employee, lives in Seattle, goes by the alias Erratic, boasted about the hack on social media and appears to have obtained some information from several other companies, government entities, and educational institutions, according to the court documents. Her resume lists 8 different employers over a 12-year period, including positions with Amazon and a division of Lowe's, Lowe's, the hardware store. One of the things that I thought was interesting was the types of employers she's had over the 12-year period. I did read somewhere that one of the positions was as more or less an ethical hacker. And I have a quote from Neo Nazarati, CEO of Columbus Soft, which acquired Seattle Software Solutions, which I guess is where she worked, from a previous owner, said Thompson was a very talented white hat ethical hacker who excelled at testing client security systems for flaws. She was involved in the hacker community, but from what I knew of her, I don't see how she would have done anything illegal. I think that's really interesting, right? It's like she made a career as a white hat hacker. So she obviously knew how most exploits took place, and she was practiced in it. So what would flip the switch to go ahead and break the law? And then you pair that up with the fact that in 3 months, at least what they're saying now is that it doesn't appear that she accessed any of the accounts or sold any of the data. Maybe she was doing this for more or less kicks, just to say I was able to do it, and then fame and get props on social media from the rest of the hacker community. It seems like a plausible explanation. I think what people have to understand that, if they're listening to this and they're, kind of hackers and they like doing things like this for sport, they have to realize that the victim of something like this is not only Capital One, which, they have they have a lot of stake from a dollars and cents standpoint, but all those people who had their accounts compromised are now going to have to go through and make sure that they have a credit watch put on their account. It's just going to inconvenience them. And so, a lot of people are affected by this in a negative way. It's not a joke.
Right. Yeah. It's just, this it's just a weird, not clear what that motive was, the background and the whole lack of thing. If I was a conspiracy theorist, this would be the opening of the movie where, the person is doing this hack and there's some sort of, spy thing, espionage thing happening behind the scenes, and, they've got the wrong person or something along those lines. It just, something doesn't smell right for me yet.
So it's funny if you watch a hacker movie and you watch them pouring through millions of lines of code, and I have a feeling that most hackers don't operate like that. Because the more, when I was more hands-on into this side of the world, it's a lot of IP scanning and running scripts to try well-known passwords that people often use and stuff like that. It's try to find the least common denominator vulnerabilities. Now, obviously, if you have a specific target and the way that, there's different kinds of hackers, and I don't know what kind of hacker we're talking about here, but, there's also state-sponsored kind of cyber attackers. Those guys are operating at a pretty high level, I'm sure. But there's so many people out there who are wannabe hackers who are, the nickname is script kiddies.
Yeah.
People who just go out and download a bunch of application, kind of figure out the anatomy of a hack, but they're looking for low hanging fruit. So I don't know if this was more or less low hanging fruit, or an inside job or something like that. We don't know that information at this moment.
We're basically just speculating, really, beyond what we have.
Yeah, we're speculating. My guess is that, I kind of have a feeling that, it could have been Capital One, or it could have been probably a number of other companies that had their stuff hosted at Amazon. It does seem like more or less that it's probably not a total coincidence that she worked for Amazon Web Services, and then the system she hacked was hosted at Amazon Web Services. I think, like you mentioned, she had to have some kind of inside knowledge that she knew what to look for. At least to get part of the hack done. And then with her background as kind of an ethical hacker, you and I know this, right? So from when you go into production with web applications, you're going to hire somebody like White Hat Security to come and scan your application and look for vulnerabilities. And they can do that from outside the firewall. You can let them inside the firewall. Usually it's a good idea to do a combination of both. And they're going to scan your application and look for all these different vulnerabilities. And some of them are like, hey, I mean, if you didn't configure your application very securely, it's going to come back and say, hey, this service is running with the default credentials. And having worked in the financial services industry, I'm sure that Capital One runs those kind of scans. So it's probably not likely that it was a default password, but there's a good chance it was a easily guessed password or that the attacker got the password through some other means.
Right. Some sort of checkbox somewhere that you kind of have to know what you're looking for. Maybe, it's not readily apparent that allows, some sort of account to come in and do whatever. But yeah, I think there was definitely some leveraging of inside knowledge that might be attributed to this.
Yeah. Hey, one other thing I wanted to talk about with this is that, kind of the how to find out if your information was stolen. The thing that I found out, or at least as of this morning, what was published on the news articles that I read, is that Capital One currently doesn't have a website where you can go and just self-check to see if you're part of the breach, but that they are planning to reach out to all the customers directly who were affected. My guess is that if they haven't reached out to you yet, you probably were not affected, being that this happened or this was released a few days ago. And I don't know that for sure though, but that's what I found out, is that they're going to contact you directly. If anybody out there was contacted directly, and you can send us a message and let us know what it was like, how you were contacted, what they informed you of, and all of that. That would be pretty cool. It'd be something maybe we could report back on. And what else did I find out?
This is an area where companies typically struggle too, is the notification process of a breach. Making sure the right people are notified in a timely manner. It seems like it's never really quite good enough from a notification standpoint. So it'll be interesting to see how this kind of unfolds in real time for the affected users.
Right. And one other thing that I saw, which I thought we should repeat, is just that be on guard for emails or phone calls from scammers posing as Capital One or government representatives asking for credit card or account information or your social security number. It's when something like this happens and someone calls, you just might be so surprised. Make sure that they go through a verification process of some sort, or you call them back before you kind of get engaged and provide too much information.
Yeah. Phishing is going to be on the rise, definitely. I mean, it already is, right? It's kind of it's more of a shotgun approach to hacking, but stuff like this doesn't help. And, I would expect that there'll be a large number of Capital One phishing emails. Click here to find out if you were affected, and that takes you to the wrong site. Enter your credentials, and all of a sudden, now you're in real trouble. It's fake. So be on the lookout for that. Always look and see what the true URL is behind links you're clicking. Just be safe out there when it comes to that kind of thing, and be aware of it, that it could be, not what it appears to be, especially in email. How folks get that information is going to be more difficult for them to track sometimes. And, unfortunately, sometimes like the older community, they may not be as aware of it, and they're kind of clicking and stuff. And unfortunately, that's how scammers operate. They just feast on these types of opportunities.
Right.
Even if they only get, 1 out of 100 or 1,000, it's still worth it for them, and they'll keep doing it.
That's right. And as you mentioned, the URL is so key. Like sometimes I end up clicking links in emails, which I know better than to do that. But if you look at the URL, if it's something you're not expecting or looks like a mess or whatever, just don't go there. I saw a recent video. I think you sent it to me, Jeff. A recent video on YouTube, and I think it was from the Black Hat Conference last year, where these guys set up a phishing site in front of Google Mail, in front of Gmail, and it went as far as to, come back to you as, asking you for. So what it was doing was it was take your username and password. It would take that information, then pass it on to Google, authenticate you, and if it was asking for a second factor, it would come back to you and ask the second factor that Google would text to you. So then it would capture that on the way back when you're typing it in, and then it would provide it to Google, and then it would be able to send you to your mail application. But in the meantime, they captured your login and your second factor.
Yeah. So that session, they could do that right away and do something with it. Yeah. Kind of like a man in the middle attack in that regards, but it was definitely more of a live session, because depending on how, the web application you're using, if they have long session timeouts, could give them free reign for, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 6 hours, whatever they've got it configured for.
30 days.
Generic. Yeah, exactly. And once they've got your account, right, they can go in and turn off two-factor. Or switch the phone number to a different phone number, so they're getting the two factors and they can log in whenever they want. So, yeah, it's just something to be aware of. I mean, it's just this is the the age we live in. There's bad actors out there.
Hey Jeff, do you remember the video that I'm talking about?
I vaguely remember it. I'm sure I could dig it up somewhere. It's probably somewhere in one of our Slack chats. So, but I vaguely remember it. It was a while back.
I think what would be cool is if we could put it in the show notes or something. I'll look for it too.
Yeah.
So if we can find it, it'll be in the show notes.
That's a good caveat, right? If we can search through our Slack history, and if we feel like it, we'll put it in there. But yeah, we'll try and dig it up and put it in there. All right. I think that's a pretty good recap of where we're at Capital One. It'd be interesting to see how this unfolds over the next days, weeks, months, as more maybe comes to light on this. But good to kind of talk about it here in real time and see what's going on.
Yeah, since we're recording and publishing every week, we can always carve out a couple minutes if there's a juicy update.
Yeah, that works out well. Well, hope you guys enjoyed listening to this. Feel free to post amazing reviews and like and star and upvote and whoever else, share it with your friends. Always looking to have folks be part of the conversation. So if you've got something you want to let us know about, there'll be a link to that in the show notes as well, where you can leave us a message, whether it's a comment, a question, or a topic you'd like Jim and I to address in the future. So don't hesitate to reach out. And we'll leave it there for now, Jim, and we'll talk to you later.
Party on, Wayne.
Party on, Garth.
You've been listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. To access all episodes, visit identityatthecenter.com.